I will tell you, I went out, as I said, every day and to the best of my ability, gave people the best facts as I knew them at that time. Sometimes things evolved, sometimes we were wrong. I admit it.
Hi, I'm Malika Bilal, and I'm here with Sean Spicer, former White House press secretary, because we need to talk. Polls have shown for a while that 6 in 10 Americans disapprove of the president's handling of the coronavirus crisis. He's told the American people it's not something to fear, and it's a virus that has killed more than 200,000 people just here in the US. Why is this administration so seemingly inept at handling this crisis?
I don't necessarily agree with that. I mean, first of all, let's be clear, it's a novel virus. No one knew what we were dealing with at the beginning. We've seen both the CDC in our own country and the World Health Organization worldwide change their guidance. Just the other day, the World Health Organization changed their position on large gatherings. And so I think the White House has had some really good days. They've done some really good things, and they've had some not so good days. But the president has led an effective task force that has gotten the resources out to the country as we needed and minimized the threat. There are things that they have said and actions that they've taken that probably in retrospect could have been done differently. But I don't know that anybody, whether it's one of our governors or other world leaders, wouldn't face the same sort of criticism.
They might face that criticism, but what they're not facing are the numbers that we're facing. So I just want to read you a few of these stats. People in the US are dying at rates much higher than in other high income countries during this pandemic. There are lists. There's Germany, there's Israel, there's Denmark. After adjusting for population size, deaths in the US this year are more than 85% higher than those places. This is supposed to be the greatest country in the world. When you hear these numbers, what goes through your head?
Well, look, I think anybody who knows somebody or has a friend or a family member or a coworker that's been stricken by coronavirus understands how devastating it can be to somebody's health, to their well-being, to their job. So I feel for them, and I think we should be doing everything as a country. And I think we are. I think the country is learning on this. It's going to deploy a vaccine probably earlier than ever before. Does that mean we're perfect, Malika? No. I think that there's things that we can do to help this. But I think that we've got a problem in this country now where we've created a political divide about how we're going to react to the coronavirus. And I think in large part, there's a lot of blame to go around. When you can tell people, not just folks on the left, but health officials, that it's okay to go out and protest in a large group because that's a larger health issue than protecting people, and that, but it's not okay to go to a church, it doesn't pass the smell test with a lot of Americans. And so there's an inconsistent messaging coming from a lot of professionals. You saw that with mask wearing. It's not a good idea to wear a mask. Then it was a good idea to wear a mask. Now it's not a good idea to wear a cloth mask. It's, we keep sending inconsistencies in messages to people. And I think that for that reason, there's a lot of distrust as to what's being said. And both a lot of leaders on the left and a lot of the folks in the media are responsible for part of that. But again, I think if we want to have a discussion about who's to blame more, we could go on for hours. The question is, what needs to be done to eradicate this, to make sure that not another person either dies from or has to deal with it.
You routinely get comments from people who say that you helped make facts irrelevant. You misled the press. You were part of a greater problem that we see with the White House. You were not the first presidential spokesman to obscure the truth from that podium, but what do you make of comments like that? What do you make of the thoughts from fellow Americans?
Well, look, I mean, I've said this before. I've dealt with this for the last 3 years. I went out every day and did my best job, did the best job I could to convey the policies and principles and ideas, thoughts, and announcements of the president of the United States and the U.S. government. Now, there are times when people disagreed with the president's views or the president's thoughts. My job as his spokesman is to go out and communicate that, not to interpret them, not to rehash them, but to tell you what they are. And there are a lot of times when people said, well, I don't agree with what he's saying. How could you possibly say that? Well, that's my job. My job is to go out and communicate those ideas and issues and policies and principles. And so obviously there are some people who disagree with that. Secondly, I think, I wrote an entire book about this called The Briefing, but I made mistakes. I think everybody does. Mine were obviously on a lot bigger public scale. And,
For those, Sean,
and
if I may, for those who have
yeah.
not had a chance to read that first book of yours, what was one mistake that you've owned up to?
I've opened up. I mean, literally, I say. I mean, initially, even on my first day, which has made made a lot of headlines. I talked about how we screwed up that day and how we could have done it better. We talked about how the inauguration came to be, and that was obviously a massive mistake on my part and how it was handled. And I've said that over and over again, both in terms of what I wrote in the book and in subsequent interviews. Um, so I happen to do it on a much bigger stage than most people ever have to. But there's a lot of things in terms of people that I hired, interactions that they had. There's times that I look at the tapes from some of the briefings, and it might not even be a mistake, but I'll look at it and go, God, why did I react that way? I could have, maybe been a little nicer or something like that.
Talk to me about what was happening behind the scenes, because as you say, you are the spokesperson for the person in the White House. These aren't necessarily your views or your words. Were there facepalm moments? Are you in that back room before you come into the briefing room and you're thinking, I can't say this. I know members of the press. I know that they're not going to accept this.
Well, sure. There's moments. I mean, there's moments where I'm talking to the president, and I would explain to him, "Hey, this is how they're going to react to this, or this is how I think the response is going to go." And there are days when he said, "Okay, let's walk through this," and there are days when he would say, "I don't care." But look, I do want to say this is that there's two sides to this coin. I have a list, and I just wrote a book that came out this week called Leading America. If you look through it, the media likes to act as though it's a one-sided thing. There are complete fabrications, mistruths, half stories, and definitely slighted and angled media pieces, both on broadcast, on the internet, and in print. The media don't like to talk about their role in this, and I think that's the other half of this. Nobody's perfect, but there have been more stories than not that I can pull down that have been about me or about the administration or things that I've done, not just in the last, during my tenure at the White House, but 6 years at the RNC and 25 years doing this, that have been completely and falsely and patently wrong. And yet the media as an organization rarely takes responsibility for their mistakes. Once in a while, sure, they'll put an update on a story. But when they blatantly misrepresent what's happening or tell a half truth or misrepresent someone's angle because it's sensational, it gets them clicks, that's just as bad. And I think that it's interesting in these conversations that I've had over the last couple of years, media likes to act like they're the victim in all of this, and they're part of the problem.
I hear what you're saying, but this is an administration that gave us a new term, alternative facts. That wasn't a term that anyone had any familiarity with before this administration. It is well documented that the Trump administration and this president, Donald Trump himself, have peddled a number of false claims. Is that and was that an intentional strategy for this White House?
Sure. Okay. Fair criticism. But the question I ask is, have you ever asked that of, say, someone from the Biden administration when they go out and say very similar type things? How many times has the vice president misconstrued a fact? Just the other day in the primary, he started in the debate rather. He started talking about the fact that he's never made fracking a ban on fracking an issue. He said it live on stage on a CNN debate with Kamala Harris there. She was the person that he was going after. She said he's never said that. It's been on their website. And yet all of the folks in the media walk away from this because they have no desire to hold the same type of accountability that they do to one side to the other. So I think that your criticism doesn't seem to be well rounded. It's like we want to go after the Trump administration, but we don't want to look at what the other side is doing. It's a very slanted interpretation of how the world is going right now.
Sean, I completely hear you. We invite the Biden campaign to come onto this show, and we will hold their feet to the fire as well. But we're talking about the person who has the White House right now. And of course, two wrongs don't
Yeah,
make a right. So talking
I agree with
about what
you.
the White House has done and the atmosphere that the White House has fostered, what do you make of that?
But again, I look. First of all, I will tell you, I went out as I said every day, and to the best of my ability, gave people the best facts as I knew them at that time. Sometimes things evolved. Sometimes we were wrong. I admit it, right? But I also think that at the same time, the media has a responsibility in this when they create a sensational atmosphere in which they lie about certain circumstances to create more stories or misinterpret things intentionally, and that happens more and more from the mainstream media, whether it's CNN, the New York Times, Washington Post. Kamala Harris got on stage the other day and told a story about Abraham Lincoln that was patently false. And again, very little outrage, very little fact checking done, but because it fits the narrative and the agenda of the mainstream media here in the United States.
I have to say, I saw myself fact checkers fact check that. So I take your point that fact checkers are working overtime right now, and it is on both sides. Fact checkers indeed have found 20,000 incidents of false claims from the Trump administration. So Generally speaking, is this a recipe for success for any president, whether that be this administration or a subsequent one?
Look, I'm going to tell you how I judge a Republican or a Democrat in office right now. Is what they got done for America, whether they A, fulfilled their promises and did what they say they were going to do, and B, whether it moved the country in the right direction. When you look down what the president actually said he would do as a candidate, and I know early on in the White House there was a board that was kept to check off these things. We went down the list of things that the president said that he would do and promise the American people, and he checked them off. Ultimately, as a politician, that's what your biggest a level of accountability is doing what you said you would do. But secondly, the question is, do those policies end up making the country, families, and businesses a better place? And I think in the case of the president, he has. So, there seems to be this idea of everyone getting wrapped around tweets and content and style. I get it, but at the end of the day, a tweet doesn't make your life better. Cutting someone's taxes or cutting the regulations that allow a business to hire more people and put more people to work or raise their wages does.
Let's talk about what's in the news right now. The Supreme Court confirmation hearings. A majority of Americans do not believe the Supreme Court justice appointment should be made before the election. Are Republicans simply ignoring what the majority wants?
Well, I think, look, if you govern by polls, then that's one thing. But I think I can tell you as a Republican, I want him to fill that seat and fill it ASAP. I mean, the reality is that there's a vacancy, right? And it is the responsibility of the president of the United States to nominate someone for that vacancy. That is the law. That's what's supposed to happen in America. It's up to the Senate to decide whether or not they want to take up that nomination or not. In this case, the Senate has decided to take it up. I'm glad they're doing it, but those are the laws of our country. We don't govern by polls. And unfortunately, frankly, that's become too big of a problem in America right now. We had an issue in Virginia where some things happened last night with people, the registration system. And now they're going back and saying, well, we need to extend the voter to the ability of people to register. There are laws for reasons. There are statutes for reasons. That's what lawmakers get together, pass a law, make a decision about what the law is going to be. We don't get to pick and choose which ones we want to follow and how we want to follow them. They're set out for a reason. If you don't like them, you elect people who will change them. But I think right now, you've got this idea of, well, here's what people want. Well, there's a vacancy. Justice Ginsburg passed away, and it's up to the president of the United States by law to fill that vacancy. He has done it. The Senate got to decide whether it wanted to take it up. They chose to do so, and I'm glad they did. And I think, frankly, at the end of the day, if you've been watching the hearings, Amy Coney Barrett is probably one of the most impressive and qualified justices that I've ever seen in action.
Sean Spicer, we'll leave it there. Thank you for joining me on We Need to Talk. So much more to talk about. Let's do it in the comments. Let us know what you think of this conversation and keep it going. And for all of the latest U.S. election news, head over to aljazeera.com/simply2020. I'll see you next time.